Hello, welcome to another video on the Germanicus and Piso text. Just by way of context, a reminder that Germanicus is on his deathbed. They've discovered all the nasty curses and spells in his room, and he has been visited by a number of friends. And the last section we read ended with them swearing that rather than lose their chance for revenge, they would lose their lives. So they plan to take action on his behalf. So let's see where this takes us. So we start off with neque, multo post mortuus est. Nice, short, relatively straightforward phrase. Neque is a negative. It's a linking one with that quet on the end of it. So, and not. And not, molto, literally sort of by much, but it's often used just as an adverb to mean much. So, and not molto, much post, after. So, and not long after, not much after, mortuus est. Mortuus we know is dead, but it's also the perfect participle of morior, to die. So with this est on the end of it, that turns it into the verb in the perfect tense. So, and not long afterwards, mortuus est, he died. So Germanicus is actually dead now. And not long afterwards, he died. And there's a description of the reaction to that. Ingenti luctu provinciae et circum iacentium populorum. Ingenti luctu, both in the ablative, but we'll talk about how to deal with that in just a second. Ingenti, obviously from ingens, meaning huge or great or big. Luctu from luctus is grief. So ingenti luctu literally means with the great grief. But you may be better off translating it as to the great grief, because we're instantly going to modify that with provinciae. So to the great grief, provinciae is in the genitive of the province. So to the great grief of the province. Remember that he has been sent off to Syria. Piso is technically the governor there, but Germanicus has been in command of the Roman military forces there. So not long afterwards, he died to the great grief of the province, et circum iacentium populorum. So et, obviously, and. Both circum iacentium and populorum are in the genitive, so they're functioning in the same way as provinciae. So to the great grief of the province, et to the great grief, and to the great grief, circum iacentium populorum. Circum iacentium is a compound verb. It's in a participle form here with that eum ending on it. It's genitive. But circum means obviously around, and iacentium comes from iaceo, meaning to lie, so as in to be geographically close by. So circum iacentium means sort of the lying around. So you may wish to translate it as just something as simple as nearby. So, but we'll see how it fits in, because it's also modified by populorum over here. So of the peoples. So you end up with something like to the great grief of the province and of the peoples lying nearby. So, and of the nearby peoples, basically, I think is probably the easiest thing to say. Basically, what Tacitus is trying to get across is that Germanicus is well thought of in this area of the empire, and actually broadly across the empire historically. So when he dies and it's announced, the province itself breaks out into mourning, and also that spreads to the surrounding populations as well. Surrounding actually is probably a good translation of circum iacentium. So let's just recap that from the beginning, because that feels a little bit like I've made that a bit wordy. So, and not much afterwards, and not long afterwards, mortuus est, he died, ingenti luctu, to the great grief provinciae of the province, et, and circum iacentium populorum, of the surrounding populations, of the surrounding peoples. Indolerant exterrae nationes reges quae. So the verb right up at the front, which gives it a bit of emphasis. Indoluerant means something like they grieved. So we need a subject, and that comes immediately afterwards in the form of exterrae nationes rather. They grieved foreign nations. So foreign nations grieved. Exterrae, again, you can see is a compound. You've got ex, so out or outside, and then terrae is land. So lands outside means foreign ones. So exterrae nationes, foreign nations grieved. Reges que. The que on the end is just functioning as and, obviously, and reges is just kings. So foreign nations and kings grieved. And you get an explanation as to why here. Tanta fuerat ilius comitas in socios. So tanta from tantus in the feminine here. So great. Fuerat. This often catches people out. Remember that the verb to be is extremely irregular. So sum in the present tense, and then eram, eras, erat in the imperfect. Fui is the perfect tense. I have been. And because you've got this erat on the end here, this must be pluperfect. So tanta fuerat, so great had been. Well, what had been? The subject here actually is over here in the form of comitas, which is friendliness and is also feminine. So that's why you've got tanta rather than tantus. So great had been the friendliness. And then that's modified by ilius. I know people sometimes struggle with illa illud, but just like all the other pronouns, ilius with that ius ending on it is genitive. So great had been the friendliness, ilius, of that man. So you might want to just translate that as his. It refers to Germanicus. We're talking about his qualities. So great had been his friendliness in socios. This is slightly difficult in English because in sort of has the sense of against often in Latin when it's got an accusative, or into, as you'll have commonly seen as well. But more simply translated, it's probably just towards is more straightforward in English. So great had been his friendliness towards, and his socios are his allies. So great had been his friendliness towards his allies. And then coupled with that, the sort of other side of the coin, mansuetudo in hostes. So you need to imply the so great had been his again, but we've got a new subject. So great had been his mansuetudo, which is kind of mercy, clemency. So great had been his mercy in hostes towards his enemies. So the picture we're painting is one of a man who a reasonable man, a man who behaves as he should. You know, he's friendly towards his allies. He doesn't take them for granted or mistreat them. And in war towards his enemies, he's merciful as well. This is a very positive quality in the Roman state. You know, Caesar is particularly famed for his mercy, so it's an extremely positive thing that you don't just slaughter your enemies indiscriminately. You show mercy towards them. Anyway, so there we go. So great had been his friendliness towards his allies and his mercy towards his enemies. Propter vultum eloquentiamque venerationem omnium adeptus erat. Okay. Propter, which usually comes with an accusative, means something like on account of. So on account of vultum, his face. This might seem like we're going in a slightly strange direction, but we're getting towards his more sort of human qualities in the sense of his physical qualities, you know, the things, the way he looks, the way he sounds, that sort of thing. So on account of his face, you may wish to translate vultum as looks here, or appearance. So on account of his appearance, eloquentiamque, eloquentiam fairly obviously gives us the English word eloquence, so I'm sure you can see it in there. Okay, so on account of his appearance and his eloquence, or his manner of speech, venerationem omnium adeptus erat. So venerationem is the object, like rakes, so rakes, regem, venerationem. So we want a verb before we take that, and that comes in the form of adeptus erat down here. This is not a verb you'll be familiar with. It's an opponent verb. It comes from adipiscor, and this is the participle. So again, we've made a main verb, a bit like we did with mortuus est at the top, out of the participle and the verb to be. Only this time, whereas mortuus est in the first line is just perfect because you've just got est on the end of it, so the tense is dictated by the participle. Here we've got erat. So rather than being perfect, this use of the imperfect plus the perfect participle, which is adeptus, gives you a pluperfect. And the root meaning of the verb is to receive something or obtain it. So adeptus erat, he had obtained, he had received. So on account of his looks and his eloquence, he had received, and then take your object over here, venerationem, the respect, the veneration, the reverence. You can see the English word veneration in there. So the reverence omnium. Um, this again often catches people out. It's a little tiny thing, but it often gets people. Omnis is a third declension adjective, so omnium is genitive plural, like reges, 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 regum, regibus, regibus. So it's genitive plural. He had received the reverence of all, i.e., of everybody. Et erant qui illum magno Alexandro ob formam aetatem genus locumque mortis ad aequarent. Okay. So et obviously and erant qui is a it's not really tricky, but it often catches people out. When you've got this errant at any form of the verb to be at the beginning of a phrase, usually rather than he was or he is, or in this case they were, uh, there were is the nuance that brings. When you shift that verb forward, you create there were, and there were qui. And this is a bit of a shorthand. It sort of means people who, literally, and there were who. But you need something more than that in English. So, and there were people who, there were those who. That then, that qui, being nominative plural, is your subject. So I'm going to go straight for a verb because illum immediately afterwards is accusative, and magno Alexandro is is dative rather. So we're going to jump straight to a verb. And there were those who ad aequarent. I don't know if you can see here, but the English word equals comes from this verb, aequare, or ad aequare as we've got here, but you can see the root in there that we get in English, so equals. And it means to compare something, to measure something against, and that's why we used it in English as equals. And there were those who ad aequarent compared, and then that's going to take our accusative, which we've already discussed is over here. And there were those who compared that man, illum, i.e. Germanicus again. So, and there were those who compared him, and then with the dative here, Magno Alexandro, to Alexander the Great. This is quite a big thing in the ancient world. Alexander the Great has a kind of legendary status. Obviously, he's a historical character, a historical person, but because of the way in which, because of his achievements in his life, the great achievement of conquering the Persian Empire, which lies immediately to the east of Greece, a much bigger empire than he controlled as as the king of Macedon. Um, this sort of legendary status emerges around him. He's quite mythologized. There are various stories about Romans comparing themselves to Alexander the Great. The most famous of which is probably Caesar looking at a statue of Alexander, and bemoaning how much Alexander had achieved by the time he was Caesar's age. Yeah, and what had Caesar achieved? Yeah, he compared. Obviously, Caesar went on to achieve a significant amount before he was assassinated, but Alexander achieved a lot very young. So he is the kind of pinnacle of achievement in the ancient world, and Roman generals in particular looked up to him and styled themselves on him, even down to their haircuts. The great general Pompey the Great is said to have had a very similar haircut to the one that Alexander had in when he was depicted in statues. So they want to be like Alexander. So this is a big deal that the people are comparing Germanicus to Alexander. It's not just on account of his achievements, though. There are various other things that come to that contribute towards it, which we'll see here as well. Anyway, so let's go back to the text. And there were those who, ad aequarent, compared illum him, Magno Alexandro, to Alexander the Great, ob formam. Formam means sort of shape or form in its most simple terms rather. But again, a bit like Waltham that we had earlier on, it means his looks. So on account of his looks, ob is where we're getting on account of here for his looks, and then you need to imply that ob again because we're just going to get a list of qualities here. So they compared him to Alexander the Great on account of his looks, aetatem, his age, genus, his family, his race. So Alexander rather was a member of the royal family of Macedon. So, and Germanicus is a member of the Roman imperial family. So there's a connection there. In terms of aetatem, Alexander, as I'm sure you're aware, died very young. So they both, these are the comparisons they're making. They're both good looking, they both died young, they're both from famous families, genus. And then the last comparison they make is locumque mortis. So they compared him to Alexander on account of his looks, his age, his family, and locum mortis and the place of his death. Alexander, although from Macedon in northern Greece, died in Babylon in Asia Minor. And of course, a similar thing has happened here, that Germanicus has been sent across to Syria, which also is in Asia Minor. And remember that the Romans are not particularly particular about geography. So Syria, Babylon, well, they're both in Asia Minor. They're both outside of what they might consider the civilized world. So that's where the comparison comes here. So they compared him to Alexander on account of his looks, his age, his family, and the place of his death. And then Tacitus gives us a bit more of, I suppose, the reasoning, the justification for this. Nam affirmar verent utrumque corpore decoro praeditum genere insigni autem weeks triginta annos natum periisse. So nam, to start with, for. So for in the sense of since or because, is giving a reason. For affirmar verent, they declared. Again, the English word in there is fairly obvious. They affirmed, but declared is probably better. For they declared. Utrumque, it's a kind of odd little pronoun which refers to both men. So for they declared both. And the verb affirmar verent is going to introduce an accusative and infinitive indirect statement. So for they declared that both. And then we're going to look out for some infinitives, which actually are a little bit hidden here. There's one which is obvious, but the others are hidden. For they declared that both, that each man, that both of them, and then we're going to need an infinitive. Now, actually, your infinitive is here. It's just praeditum. It needs an essay to go with it, but which is missing. Just for the sake of brevity, Tacitus has missed it out. So utrumque praeditum esse, for they declared both to be, and then praeditum, endowed, furnished with. Okay. So in more simple terms, they declared that both had. But I like furnished with or endowed. It creates a bit of grandeur. For they declared that both were furnished with corpore decoro. Corpore is a body. It's in the ablative after praeditum. You furnish something with something. So they are furnished with corpore, with a body, decoro. You can probably see again the English word decorated in there. It means kind of beautiful, or handsome, in the context of the two men. For they declared that both were endowed with beautiful bodies, or with a beautiful body, because we're talking about them each individually, and it's singular. Then you get the same construction again. You're going to need to imply the nam affirmar verent utrumque again. For they declared that both were endowed with beautiful body. They declared that both were genere insigni autem. Again, the infinitive is lacking. It's autem, which comes from the verb orior, which means to rise. So it's autem esse. They declared that both had risen genere from a family, from an insigni family, from a distinguished family. So they declared that both were risen from distinguished family. Vix triginta annos natum periisse, and then finally, so this is the third round of they declared that both periisse, had died, had perished. The verb perio literally means to go through, but it's used in a metaphorical sense to mean to die. They declared that both had died, both had perished, and then vix is just a little adverb which means scarcely. So they declared that both had died scarcely, triginta annos natum, literally sort of born 30 years. But this is how the Romans expressed age. So they declared that both had perished scarcely aged 30 years. So both had died very young. So you just need to keep in mind that you've got to use this affirmar verent, or at least imply it, several times as you go through this last set of phrases. They declared that both were endowed with a handsome body. They declared that both were risen from distinguished family, and they declared that both periisse had died weeks triginta anno senatum, scarcely aged 30, or aged scarcely 30. Okay. I think that's it. I don't actually think this section is too difficult. It flows relatively nicely. So I hope you found that useful and that you can deal with that. But as usual, I make this plea every time, but I rarely hear back anything from anyone. If you have any problems, do please let me know.